Today's presenter will be Gus Cicala, President and CEO of Project Assistance. Gus founded Project Assistance in 1996. We're a week away from our 20-year company anniversary to help companies achieve better, faster, more cost-effective project-based results. Gus is a recognized portfolio and project management expert who has published many popular articles and books on the subject, and is frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest around project management. Take it away, Gus.
Thanks, Daniel. And thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We're going to go for about an hour, usually pretty close to an hour. So I'm going to start off by just reviewing our agenda on the topic of resource management. First, we're going to talk about why is this important, and after we talk about why it's important, why it's hard to do, and we're going to go through a format on the challenges and the solution using a do's and don'ts format. So we'll talk about the project online or project server, depending on whether you're on premises or in the cloud, overview, and then some do's and don'ts, and I'm going to sprinkle in some demonstrations as we go through that, and we'll talk about an improvement methodology. How do we change our behavior? How does an organization get to be successful at change management so that we can do resource management? So our first poll question gets you involved. So if you look at your screen, we're going to give you about 30 seconds to respond to which best describes your organization's state of resource management. Okay, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That was 45 seconds total. Close the poll. And so I would say probably no surprises here. Which best describes your organization's state of resource management? You're here for a reason, so if it was perfect, you probably wouldn't be here. None, it's kind of stacked. I mean, you can see what it says, right? None is the most common, implemented, not fully adopted, and implemented and adopted but ineffective. So let's talk about that. So a goal without a plan is just a wish. So let's talk about how we do this. And we're talking about planning, right? So first, why does resource management matter? And it does matter. You know, as Dan mentioned, we've been doing this for 20 years, and it is a rare organization that doesn't at least have a desire. Sometimes they're afraid of it. Sometimes they've tried it and it hasn't worked. But at the bottom of all this is why does virtually every organization, or at least every project-based organization, interested in the topic? And you know, the main answer is the portfolio. You know, I guess the other question would be, why does this get attention at the highest levels of the organization? And the answer is, when we see a portfolio fail to deliver the benefits, having spent the money and the time and the effort and the resources, why didn't we deliver? Oftentimes, resource management enters the conversation. This question about our capacity versus our demand, and whether or not we can actually have a handle on that. So a lot of schedules are what I call Gantt chart driven. If you ask most people what a project plan looks like, they'll probably say a Gantt chart, which is really just a rendition of the dates. And so when schedules are not driven by resource demand, they're hard to validate and oftentimes are incorrect. So the real problem is the right resource often is not available at the right time. And you know, I'll talk about the work field of Microsoft Project a little bit today. It's kind of the order quantity, and you know, to be able to do that accurately is a challenge. So we'll spend some more time on that. But the why is, we need people to be available at the right time, the right resources at the right time. The other problem here is, there's forecasting questions. What's our spend to meet the portfolio demands? How do we deliver the promise of the organization's vision? And without knowing what our supply and demand is, it's very hard to make those commitments. And the other thing is, these portfolios are intended to be nimble, right? The marketplace is nimble. Our customers have changing needs, and our competitors are trying to pass us. And so there's a pretty strong time pressure on this thing to say, how can we meet our business goals efficiently and quickly? So we call this the Keystone. As you see here, the middle stone that holds up in this case the two sides of the two banks of the river for the bridge to cross. We very much see that one of the major connection points between projects and portfolios is accuracy about resource demand and resource capacity. So we'll refer to that as the Project Keystone, or the keystone of portfolio and project management. So when we talk about resource demand and resource capacity, let's do some definitions. So what do we mean by demand, or how are resources demanded? What kind of categories do we see when we see this person being stretched across two initiatives here? So we talk about projects that haven't even started yet. So I may be on a project that's going to run to the end of the year, yet there's another one that's going to start on Labor Day, and maybe I'm scheduled on that one too. So there's demand out there in the future. For proposed projects, there's also demand in the future, and we're really talking about future here. Let's make sure that that's what we're really talking about. Project management tools are really forecasting tools, and so we're really trying to forecast the demand of proposed resources on proposed projects, active projects, administrative time, non-project time, and as well as operational work. So not every organization shares their their resources between operational work and project work, but there are enough organizations out there that this is a consideration in terms of the definition. Are we defining our resource demand in terms of these categories? So this is sort of the comprehensive view of the typical demand, and then your organization will define that as appropriate. It wouldn't be uncommon to see resources only on active development projects and maybe not on the commercial side or the operational side of the business. So that's our overall resource demand. So before we get into our next topic around challenges, let's talk about your challenges. So you should see 5 choices on your screen now. What challenges does your organization face with resource management? Okay, the numbers are rolling in. Everybody took some time to read this. Can they pick more than one here, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, so you can pick more than one, just so you know. So it doesn't add up to 100%. Okay, we've been at it for 45 seconds. I think that's enough time. So more than half covered no resource management. That's a challenge. The wrong level of detail, too much or too little. I'm guessing most of you were saying too little. Generating accurate and timely information, so they're well above 50%. 3 or above 50%, and then lack of investment and lack of executive support. And I'm surprised that number is not smaller. Certainly, in our experience, we see a unacceptable lack of executive support on this thing. At least at the level of implementing PPM tools. Okay, well, thanks for your input. So let's talk about the challenges to resource management. If you have to see any problem, however complicated, which when you look at it in the right way, did not become still more complicated, okay, well, I should probably be able to meet that quote in our demonstration today. So the overview of the solution, we're talking about Microsoft Project Server as an on-premise solution, oftentimes referred to Microsoft EPM, as well as Project Online or Office 365 project in the cloud, hosted by Microsoft. So this applies. This view applies to both of those environments because they're virtually identical. So strong resource management depends on a lot of pieces, right? And so when we get to the solution later on, we'll talk about the approach we take in terms of how you build up to getting an accurate resource demand and what other things have to be working well before we really have a good handle on capacity versus demand. So there are a lot of sort of building blocks that have to be in place before we go there. So this is a slide generated by Microsoft many years ago. It really shows the two strata, if you will, or two levels of bottom-up project management and top-down portfolio management. And the demand management occurs on both sides of the equation, and they have to be in sync if we want these top-down and bottom-up pictures to be in sync. So that's what we're going to talk about here. So the challenges. Let's talk about some of the challenges. Securing executive sponsorship. So as I said, 14% said you didn't have good executive sponsorship. That's what's that? 1 in 7. That's good news for the folks on the phone. We see a lot of pilots in Project Server, Project Online, where they're trying to build dashboards to get the attention of executives. I think executives care about it. Sponsorship is a different story. So we see sort of the desire from executive leadership to want to have this information, and now the question is, how do you make a change? And the answer is from the top. We're talking about changing culture, and culture is at the highest part of the organization. This is really about culture change to be able to make this work well. Another big challenge we see a lot is, if you compare the typical investment in an enterprise-wide resource planning system known as an ERP, they're typically well into the millions, for a typical company, a mid-size, anything from half a billion on up, which is most of who we work with Microsoft Project. We see millions and millions of dollars being put into an ERP, and we see very often less than half a million and even much less than that, both from a time and a dollar investment standpoint. So this is hard to do without time and money, and so this is a big challenge from our perspective. Changing the culture. So again, with securing executive sponsorship, comes the responsibility of telling our executives what we need them to do, right? They don't have all the answers. They may have the authority, they may have the funding, but they may not have the right guidance. So part of our job is to really define what that culture should look like. Educating key personnel, and this involves, we have a leadership workshop called Leadership is Taken Not Given for project managers, but we have yet another one called Leading Project Leaders. How do sponsors become good sponsors? This education around portfolio and project management is not limited to the PMO, it's not limited to the project managers, it's not limited to the team members. This is a holistic view that says, we need everybody in the boat for this to work. Developing accurate project estimates. I think that's one of the most misunderstood, or at least has a lack of focus. That if we could just put a number into our demand in our portfolio project management tool, gee, wouldn't that be great? And it is great, and it's hard to do, and it's hard to change the culture to get that number in there. But to really say, what confidence do we have that this is in fact accurate? That's quite a different story. So developing accurate estimates is a huge challenge for most organizations. Getting to the right level of detail. We see a lot of very detailed project templates. Project managers love to turn their work breakdown structure into a to-do list, and that is one of the greatest enemies of resource management. It's tough enough to resource load a plan that has a lot of detail, and it can be done, but thinking about how plans change over time and the time it takes to maintain a highly detailed plan is difficult. So there's, Can you justify it? Sure. Does everybody want to know that every step in the project is happening? Absolutely. We recommend not doing it in WBS. Getting the right level of detail does not mean putting it in the task list. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into our hour here. Generating accurate and timely information. So how do we timely, yeah, how do you push it out? How do you pull it out? What's your dashboard look like? How does this information get into the right hands for the folks who can act upon this? And timely is a lot easier than accurate. That's a big deal. PPM technology shortcomings, still maturing. I have a book I got a long time ago called Project Management Using Microcomputers, a book written by Harvey Levine, and he has a quote in there from 1986 that said, "The project manager who was waiting for the perfect technology will be waiting 10 years from now." And he said that 30 years ago, and we're still waiting, right? A lot of good stuff out there, but certainly the technology is adequate but not perfect. I'm not sure technology is ever perfect, so what does that mean? We have to support it. We have to figure out what its shortcomings are and how we work around it. Okay, so against those challenges, some recommendations, right? So we talk about sponsorship, and I guess before I put the rest of the slide up, you're probably reading the Dilbert. I don't have enough resources to do my job. Isn't that like saying, "How now, brown cow?" You think things can't get worse, but they can. So sponsorship, especially around resource management, can be challenging. As I said, executives want it, and sometimes we try to drive it without that source, right? So I've never seen a grassroots movement ever work. I've seen grassroots movements to say, let's try to push this from the bottom and create great plans and get people interested in it, but without executive support, you're not going to have, even if you have the budget, the change isn't going to occur if it doesn't come from the top. Implementation strategy. There's a rush to implement technology and turn it on and expect it to start doing stuff for us, but the reality is the big bang approaches don't work, and what we like to see is an implementation in phases, right? So as I mentioned before, resource management is based on building blocks. It's based on estimating methodologies. It's based on maturity around project managers who understand how to build a project plan. It's built on even layers of maturity in how we even define resources, and we'll get into that a little bit later, right? But how we face it. I'm going to put a chart up here in a minute that shows what we're talking about. So when we build what we call a roadmap for PPM implementation, oftentimes it comes in phases, or maybe you would say a series of initiatives. Level of investment. So don't demand perfection while minimizing the investment, and that is a big deal. The other thing too, this little graphic here, gain minus cost over cost. This question about ROI is a legitimate question. We get a lot of executive sponsors that want to put in PPM, or PMOs that want to put in PPM technology, and they're asked, to take our proposal forward with an ROI business case. And the reality is, for an individual organization that hasn't been keeping its metrics, it's pretty hard to say where we've been compared to what our future improvement has been, and compare the two if there haven't been metrics. I mean, let's face it, project management is about defining and collecting metrics, and if we're not good at it, the metrics don't exist. So the ROI can be a really tough question in this world. There's stuff out there. There's Gartner and McKinsey and all kinds of studies that have been done, but the data is still maturing and has been for decades. So we have to find a realistic investment that you can get an optimal return on investment, which means usually smaller investments up front to prove the viability and the value of an initial install, and then layer on top of that. So what that means is when we lay out these initiatives, oftentimes resource management is going to come at a pretty simplistic level. And to that end, I'm not going to leave this up here and read this entire eye chart. But if you look down time frame and resource type and model type, right? How often are we trying to do this, and what kind of resources are we trying to forecast? So, generic resources, roles, individual. We see as the darker this table gets towards the bottom, the more complicated and the more difficult it is to get there, right? And we see some simple dependencies and investments here towards the top, and as we go down the menu here, it becomes a 7-course meal at an expensive restaurant. So the question is, can we show value in some of these initial investments and then build upon that and mature an organization? And one of the things about resource management, which is a given, but I don't hear verbalized that often, is the word all, right? All resources, all projects, right? It's hard to do this in pieces. I'm not saying it can't be done, but usually we would see an entire portfolio with its resource demand, or at least a major section of it, which would be the boundaries of where those resources are scattered, is to say, well, even if we're doing something like annual and generic FTEs, we still need accuracy by putting in all the data and doing it on a regular basis. So that's an important consideration. The level of accuracy. So this will get into our first demonstration. If you're waiting for a demonstration, it only took us 25 minutes to get there. So this idea of highly accurate estimates for demand, right? Highly accurate estimates of demand out of the gate. Okay, demand meaning what's my demand on my resources? It's a continually refined process, typically, right? So when we think about just a real simple example, even Microsoft Project sort of invites you not to even deal with demand, okay? And I'll show you what I mean by this. If I'm clicking on the new menu, and there's a little, in the window group of buttons, there's a little multiple window. I'm going to go to this thing called critical path, this project called critical path. I'm going to go to the Gantt chart, and for people who have basic familiarity with Microsoft Project, you would be familiar with the typical start, finish, predecessor, resource names. And one of the first things we talk about with people wanting to do resource management is how do you assign resources? Well, if I go to the resource tab and click on assign resources, it invites me to assign resources. And in this case, we do not see anything that looks like demand. By the way, the field in Microsoft Project is called work. Okay, so if we click the button to say, out of my resource pool, who's going to do the work, I can assign these folks. I need to click on a task. Okay, I can assign these folks. Matter of fact, I can see all 4 are assigned, and we see they're assigned to 100% of their units. What in the world does that mean? Okay, it's a 5-day task, and the field's called work. So one of the first things we recommend is to modify what's called the entry table. If I move my mouse above the ID column, it'll tell me I'm in the Gantt chart view and the entry table. I'm in Project Professional, and I'm connected to Project Online. If you look at the very bottom here, just right of the entry, the ready, it says ready mode, and it says I'm connected to projectassistance.sharepoint.com. So that is our Office 365 instance. Okay, so I'm in Project Pro. I'm in a default view called Gantt chart. I'm in the default table called entry, which implies data entry. So I'm going to right mouse click and insert a column called work. Okay, this opens up a whole new world. Okay, if we're getting beyond the Gantt chart and we're getting into the world of resources, usually work matters. Okay, so just a teaser before we go back into the slides for a minute. So I'm going to start building the case and going deeper in here. But the initial getting out of the clouds and getting into the sort of blue sky where I have some visibility is going to be looking at the work, the total work. Now you might imply what's happening here. If I've got 4 resources assigned for 5 days at 100%, you probably could figure out that this is 40 hours per person. 4 times 40 is 160. 40 hours is 8 hours a day for 5 days. So we're going to start decomposing this view here. That if all I did is assign resources and click assign, and didn't have the work in here, all I would have is the plain old Gantt chart and really no information about what my resources are doing, other than this nasty little red man here that says you're over allocated. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that as well. The next one is resource type. So that was in the previous table. Don't start off forecasting named resources unless it's a very small portfolio and a very small group of project managers and a small group of projects. Usually coming right out of the gate, forecasting named resources is tough to do. Okay, so forecasting at the role level, and usually the way this happens is if I say file new. A lot of organizations have templates. Okay, so if I start with a template, let's say a new product launch. Very kind of it to ask me when I'm going to start the project. Hopefully not today. Let's say the 1st of September. So this, we'll talk about this a little bit later if we have some time. This is a report. If you're not familiar with the current version of the project, it's called a dashboard report called an overview. Okay, well, let's go back to the view and look at the Gantt chart. And here's my work breakdown structure. And if I want to see my resources, I'm going to either click on the resource tab and click. Actually, I want to see the resource sheet. So if I hit the drop down here, it'll let me do that. What I prefer to do is right mouse click on the name of the view. Okay, so I'm going to right mouse click on Gantt chart and choose something called resource sheet. Okay, so what we have here are generic resources. Okay, now you can make generic resources. This is common in templates. We may have a pool of engineers and manufacturing folks, marketing, sales, product, etc., and there are multiple people in these roles. So all we're going to do is say, what is the demand on engineering? By the way, Microsoft Project actually has a field called generic. So if I insert, I'm right mouse clicking on the column here, insert generic. This template, in fact, did not call these generic. So if we're going to have, sometimes what we see is a resource pool, and I'll show this as an example soon, where we have generic resources and named resources because we have proposed projects by role and named projects by active projects have named resources. So in that case, we may have both. So in a case like that, you may want to designate, and watch what happens to the indicator out here, that this is generic. Okay, so now we see that I have enabled generic resources. So now I can start to sort, filter, whatever, and we'll see this as we start going to the enterprise resource pool. So what's the point? A lot of times we start with roles before we get into named resources. It's building degrees of difficulty. It's building skill in our project management population, and it's keeping it simple. The approach. What shouldn't we do? Assume your project managers are resource leveling experts. You know, it's very common when we are standing up a project instance, project online, project server, whichever it happens to be. When we talk about training, I hear things like our project managers have been using Microsoft Project for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it happens to be. Let's skip the basics. And that oftentimes is a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is what they're applying usually is that they believe their project managers know something or have a proficiency around resource management. And to be proficient in resource management, you have to be able to build what I would call an optimized plan, right? So don't assume your project managers, I would say this a little bit differently, do become proficient at balancing resources at the project level before you do resource management at the enterprise level. And what this means is project on the desktop matters a lot. Okay, if you want your enterprise resource capacity to be accurate, we can't assume our project managers are proficient in the tool. So when people ask us to take them to Project Server, one of the first things we talk about is, how do we get our project managers proficient? And just a quick look, if I'm on the Gantt chart and I want to assign my resources, I'm going to go back to that other plan I was looking at. So I'm going to go View, and I'm going to go to the Critical Path plan. Any of you that have our training guide or my book on Amazon, this is in the exercise file, so if you want to look at this, you can. But I'll show it here on the screen. So I inserted work, okay, but I still didn't know how this 160 hours was allocated. So I'm going to go ahead and close this box. And I call it lifting up the blinds. There's this thing called Details. So when I click on View, and I click on Details, it automatically applies a task form which is connected to whatever I'm clicking on above. So I click on Define Content Requirements. I have 192 hours, and I see how this is spread out. By the way, the default, which I'll bring back, I left this in a non-default view. The default view is what's known as Resources and Predecessors. Okay, so I can see that Jeffrey is 100% allocated for 12 hours, but probably not across the entire 12 days. We see that Harry is 119% allocated. Gee, I wonder what all that means. Okay, so what we start getting into here is this puzzle. Let me show a simple example so we can make the puzzle a little bit simpler. This idea that we need our project managers to do basic stuff like how can we get our project managers to put demand in correctly? What if Jeffrey's not 40 hours? Here's a common problem. What if I'm not even looking at this? What if I don't even have the work column in here? What if I just go ahead and double my work? No, I'm sorry, double my duration. What if I put 10 days in here? What happens? Now, if you're paying attention closely, it gives you a hint. Okay, you increase the duration of this task. You want to increase the work, but keep the hours, resources per day, which is called units, the same, or decrease the hours. Now, if this is making you nervous, good, right? Because if we can't do this stuff, we'll never get to a demand versus capacity unless we can manipulate our assignments. Okay, so it says, did you want to decrease the hours per day, but keep the same amount of work? I would ask that question somewhat differently. If you took the effort or the time and the research to define what the estimate is, the demand, the effort to get this task done, do you want Microsoft Project changing it for you? And the answer is probably no. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the blinds here. You might see my mouse getting a bidirectional at the base of my vertical scroll bar. Mine was bidirectional. I'm going to bring this up. It's the same as clicking Details. I just like to do it this way. And what I see is what happens. I'm going to put this back to 5 days. And it's back to 40 hours. So one of the considerations here, I don't know why my screen's doing this. Let me change that. Okay. One of my considerations is, what if I did make the effort to put in 40 hours and I didn't like the assumption of 100%, and I want to spread out those 40 hours over 10 days? So now we have to know what fixed units means. What does fixed units mean? Hold my units, my allocation at 100%. If I increase duration, keep me 100% allocated. So I'm not going to go through all this, but just to make the point, if I make this fixed work and say okay, and now I make this 10 days, what happens? It's 40 hours over 10 days. How can I see that spread out? I got a node to assign in the bottom pane something called resource usage. And now we can see that Jeffrey, during the time of January 29th to the 12th, on this thing called Define User Requirements, does in fact have 4-hour days. Now apparently this thing started at noon, and we won't get in timing. There was a half day that this thing was linked to, but you can see that this spread out 4 days. Can I edit in the column? What if I want to make this 0 and make this 4 hours at the end? Yeah, that works. Do your project managers know how to do this? right? And there's a lot more I can show here, but just to make the point, you know, back to the slide, what we were talking about is how do you crawl before you walk, right? Become proficient balancing resources at the project level before you go to the enterprise level. Level of granularity. This is a fun one. So, and it's a good example here. Let me talk about the do's and don'ts, and I'm going to go right back to that same view, that same project. Don't attempt to manage at the day level. What does that mean? I'll show you in a second. Set practical management goals and targets and manage accordingly. So managing at the day level means that if somebody's overallocated by having 9 hours on Monday and 7 hours on Tuesday, am I going to ask my project managers to get to that level of granularity and accuracy? And the answer is, I hope no. Could you justify that in some cases? Absolutely. You know, if I'm scheduled to do 9 webinars today between 9 and 5, or let's say 9 and 4, forget about the math, for lunch, and it's not going to work, right? So there are situations where that could be a problem, but you know, how do we deal with that, right? How do we deal with that compromise that I may have some exceptions, but in general, maybe we don't want to go to that level of detail. And I'll show you what I mean. One of the things I like to teach when we're talking to project managers is how can we validate if this plan is realistic. And so what I encourage folks to do, you know, our definition, especially with today's title of the webinar, is about balancing capacity versus demands. So our definition of realistic is going to be, are my resources available to do the work? So knowing, again, just to the previous slide too, do our project managers even know how to take a macro view of how their project is being laid out? So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go to the resource usage, which shows me how resources are allocated over time. By the way, if I try to analyze this project plan, if this was a 1-year project plan, there's going to be 365 days of scrolling. If each resource has 30 to 20 tasks assigned to them, and there's 200 tasks, there's going to be 2,000 assignments across potentially 2 weeks. Let's say that's 10 days. So 2,000 times 10 days, there's going to be 20,000 cells of data here, just for you to go figure out. So what we try to do is summarize it. So all I did is, this is the native default view of resource usage. I'm going to click Select All. I'm going to click Outline and Collapse. Here it calls it Hide Subtask. It's really hiding assignments in this case because this is an assignment view. This is what it's about. It's about getting my assignments right. Okay, so are my assignments right? Why is this thing not cooperating? All right, so you can do it manually when it's in a bad mood. Okay, so this is a summary of the work of these folks. Jeffrey has 396 hours. Steve has 972. The question is, who's really overallocated? And let's take a look. I'm going to go out of a day scale into a monthly scale. I'm going to ask the question, who would you really rather not be on this project, and in which month? And we can start seeing a couple real bad hotspots here. Steve has 320 hours in March and 448 in April. So what is that, 112 hours a week? There's 160 hours if you do 24/7. So he gets to sleep about 3 or 4 hours a night and work the rest of the week. Right. So this is a hotspot, right? Now so that's one thing. The other thing is, wait a minute, why is Jeffrey 96 hours and he's red? How could he possibly be overallocated? I can add something here called percent allocation. Okay, so I'm going to go down here and find this thing called percent allocation. I'm going to add it to my view. And I can see that Jeffrey is 52% allocated, but he's defined as red. So again, what's the point? It matters how we start looking at this stuff to say, do I care about the next level of detail? And by the way, the next level of detail is going to be weekly. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, Jeffrey has some weeks here. Okay, so let me go back to monthly and see what month I was talking about. So we're talking about the month of January. Let's go pick on that one, because we know he's got a problem in February. Let's look at January. Okay, so in January, Jeffrey has no work in the first 2 weeks, has 28 hours in the 20th, and 76 hours at the end of the month. So there's a good chance that's a problem. He's 190% allocated. Now we start drilling down and say, well, what's the problem, or what can I do? And oftentimes, what we talk about when we're training on this is what can you do without Microsoft Project? As a project manager, as a sponsor, as somebody who cares about this project, what can we do to unbundle Jeffrey here, to unburden him? And the answer is Microsoft Project can't do all that stuff, right? What can I do to figure out? I'm going to take the percent allocation out to get these hours back in line, and that's not an easy question, okay? Or not an easy answer. It might be an easy question, but not an easy answer. So, am I going to reduce scope? It's a triple constraint model: scope, schedule, resource. Am I going to move to schedule the project out? Am I going to add more resources? Am I going to reduce the scope and tell Jeffrey he doesn't have to evaluate the current systems? So we decided that if you're too over allocated, forget it. Okay, so this is a tough one. What's the point? The point is, if we manage at the day level, we're going to be spending a lot of time trying to get the red out of our plan, right? So what we talk about is, when do you know to ignore some of the detail? Yes, it's red. I've even had some people say, well, what can I do to get rid of the red? When I'm over here in my resource view, how can I get rid of the red? Well, there is something called formatting text. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if it annoys you so much that you can't even stand looking at it, you could actually change the definition of over-allocated. Okay, either that's red, and we can say, well, we'll make it black. Okay, and now we see the red goes away. Now I can still evaluate, right? I can still see if I go out and zoom out to a monthly time scale, then I've got a problem. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about grassroots. How does a project manager make a plan realistic? So let's take this up a notch as soon as we can. Discipline. Don't underestimate the time required to keep project plans and resource plans current. Even if your project managers know how to do this and they're not doing it now, it's going to take more time. Right? Building a Gantt chart and typing in dates in a schedule is vastly easier than going in and doing what I'm just showing you right now. Right? So discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishments. Are we able to actually create new allocations of time each week for our resource managers and our project managers to focus on resource management activities? It's new stuff. I call it new urges of energy. Where's that going to come from? Okay, so if you have project management in your as a task in your project plans, guess what? That task just went up. There's higher demand on my project managers. Technology. Do's and don'ts. Don't expect great technology to automatically create great information, right? So if we look at the outputs, usually the way I talk about this is, when people want to use project, we say, what do you want it to tell you? And we might hear demand versus capacity. Okay, that's what your output is. Guess what your input is? It's work at the assignment level. Oh, okay. So if you tell me what your output is, I can tell you what your input is. And if I know what your input is, I can tell you what your process is going to be. Right? So you need to put a process in place to acquire the inputs. And so that's, that can be a big deal. Right? These processes can be layered on as an organization matures. Analysis and response. Okay, so let's go, well, actually, I was supposed to show something here, the inputs and outputs. So I'll just show you something real fast. Now I'm going to go to the project server side. If I do a split screen here, I can have a view, called resource graph. Okay? And when I click on my resources, I can now see how they look. Okay, so there's a visual capability. I can reverse this. I can put the graph on top and put the details on the bottom. And in this case, maybe I'm going to put resource usage on the bottom. Okay, so now as I scroll through my resources, by the way, I might want to zoom this out to a monthly scale. Project always drops you down into a lot of detail. There's we have to go to the right time scale, okay? And then we can scroll through our resources. and see how they're allocated. Okay? So great information comes from good input, and we got to know how to create that input. Analysis and response. So don't maintain blind optimism that that everything's working out right. When we start getting accurate data, we have to read our instruments and respond based on what they tell you. This is something they tell. This quote comes from Instrument Flying. If you're in the clouds and you get disoriented, you got to trust your instruments or you're going to die, right? So we create this data, and people tend to live and die on this. And we've seen some of these implementations go south and be shelved because the data is not accurate. But when it is accurate, it's a wonderful thing. So let me show you an example. Not that one, not that one. Must be over here. So here's an example where we have capacity and demand by person, okay? And we can see capacity and demand. This is a wonderful output. I mean, it's not hard for an executive support team, a PMO, a CIO, a head of product development, a head of engineering, head of professional services, somebody saying, you know what, this is what I want. See this view? I need to know when that black line's bigger than the pink line. Okay. Now we start saying, well, what does it take from a data standpoint to start building this stuff? And that's where we start getting into a lot of this really sort of gory stuff. Okay, so here's me over-allocated on the website for the Agile rollout. And, how do I start manipulating these assignments? How do I go back in to the project plan and start finding the information that I need? Big deal. Okay, so I'll show some more dashboards if we have some time, but that's just one example of tell me what the output is, and I'll tell you if you're looking at demand versus capacity, you're going to need to put this work field in at the assignment level, and you're going to need a process to support that and project managers who know how to do it. Okay, adoption. So what don't we do with adoption? Well, what we don't do is write up a procedure and expect everyone to follow it. I call it the memo from Bob. We installed a project, it stood up, you had the training, the data's out there, do it or else. What we see working a lot better is the support infrastructure, right? Our methodology, which I'll show you in a little bit, via Vision, Implement, and Adopt, is about treating the last phase, the adoption, as a formal change management approach. It's a way of life. How do we educate and mentor? How do we support? How do we measure progress and continuously improve? And how do we really even get to the compensation level? How do we make this not optional? How do we make the pain of non-compliance higher than the pain of compliance? I hate to put it that way, but sometimes that's how this works. So we have, let's talk about the improvement methodology. Let me see, look at my notes here. I want to show one other thing. When I do an open to what says Project Web App here, what it's going to do is ask me to go to Project Online or Project Server. I'm going to look at all my projects. Okay, what was I looking at? Company, I think it was called Company Website, Agile. Okay, I'm going to use my publish plan. I can check this out if I'm going to modify it. I'm just going to do read-only for now. I could have a saved working version of it. I have a published version of it. This is all stuff out on the server. I thought I picked something. Okay, try that again. Okay, company website, Agile. I'm going to use the working. I'm going to use the published. Click open. I guess it's already open. Okay. Oh, there it is. Company website. Read only. Okay, great. So it's already open. Couple things. One is, what do my resources look like? Is this a realistic plan? Well, I got some red guys out here. Are they red guys because they're at the daily level, the weekly level, the monthly level? What's going on here? Resource usage. Now I'm going to start bringing in some data from the project server. So I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to select all, hide all my subtasks. clicking the wrong button last time. Now I see it. Following up my ways. Wow. Ooh. Okay. Here's Gus. That's me. So I've got some rough waters here, but not on this project. Well, what do you mean not on this project? What about the other projects? Well, here's the other projects. Okay. So now what we see is a holistic view that says, well, you know, I've got 32 hours in the month of April, but 176 of that's coming from this commercial launch thing, the commercial product launch. So there's this idea of how do I see across the entire enterprise. The other thing I'll mention from an enterprise standpoint, when you click Add Resources, this idea of building a team from the enterprise, right? So the idea of going out to, I mentioned the generics and the named resources. So you see both in here, okay? There's capabilities to filter and say, just give me a certain role, a certain group, for example. I can go ahead and test on that. How about my resource availability? I can even start charting some of this stuff. There's even graphs out here I can bring into this view and start looking at what this information is going to tell me. Oh, something went wrong. That's not surprising. That was about time. So that's kind of the you know, the long and short of the landscape of things we have to do to be good at this. So I just want to spend a few more minutes talking about outcomes. So what happens? You know, we go out and we stand up Project Server. We see three modes of failure. One failure mode is the implementation is abandoned. We open up the product, we look at it, it's too much, gee, we didn't know it was that hard. Sometimes that happens in our vision stage, but it's rare. I mean, usually we don't abandon the ship before we get out of the port, so that's one failure mode. The other one is, which is way too common, is implemented and not adopted, or a version of that which is common, which is implemented but not what we thought it was going to be. We thought we were putting a capacity demand management system in and we got a scheduling tool. Or we thought we were going to have an enterprise PPM solution that became a timesheet system. Okay, so these compromises are made, and our definition of success is it's implemented as planned and designed, it delivers the expected value, and most importantly, it continues to mature and improve the PPM process over time, or the PPM environment, portfolio project management. So the success metrics we see, I'm going to talk about the vision step in a minute, technology focused only has a very low success rate. If you think this is an exercise about understanding Microsoft Project, and I'm sure many of you don't think it's that, but we see organizations that really over-focus on the technology, go right to implementation, don't do the proper planning. And we see with a vision step, 75% rate. With an adoption step, it jumps up to greater than 90%. Matter of fact, we'll guarantee it. Okay, so our methodology that we talk about is, you know, before we do an implementation, how do we look at the process, the technology, the people and organization skills and governance as a holistic view of activities that have to be meshed together for the organization to be successful. What's the current state? What's the future state? How big is the gap between that? What's the vision to get to the future state? And then what's the roadmap, which is really a set of initiatives like that long slide I showed you with the degradations of blue colors. It's a map, it's a roadmap, it's a capability to get to the future by going through really what I call a mini portfolio, a set of initiatives about getting better at portfolio and project management, such that when we go to the requirements, we have a roadmap, we have an analysis of the organization, we have a vision of the future, we have a roadmap that really defines the requirements in sequence. So when we go to implement the technology, we say, how do we bring the requirements for process, technology, skills, and governance together so that those requirements, in fact, are realistic, so we can get the processes right, get the requirements right, get the install and config done, do the customization, do the education, and really have it be an implemented solution with governance, right? So the processes are not just project management processes, it's this stuff over here, right? What are the governance processes that actually define how we do process improvement, how we do the ongoing operation of the solution, ongoing governance, measure report, what gets measured gets managed, right? And how do we create that environment for this technology? Okay, so we have, this is our solutions web page. This is actually an extract from our solutions web page. So we do what we call the ADR, the vision step analysis, vision roadmap. training. These will take you to different pages with details on it. Project Server, Project Online, Project Training Guide, which is now in a university textbook. So that's the topic, and the next topic is averting disaster, practical approaches to identifying, evaluating, and mitigating project risk. You'll be receiving an email, a follow-up email, a thank you, and we'll be sending some more of this information to you about how to register for our next webinar. Will be on our website. And we're changing a little bit. If you've been on previous webinars, we have the parting gift slide. Instead of that, we're going to send out a blast to everybody and give you the links to the slides, the links to the PDUs. You get a 1-hour PDU today for attending. The links to the video if you want to share this in your organization. Okay, so sit tight for 24 to 48 hours, and we'll get that information in your hands. We are right on top of the hour. We might have a minute or two. Do we have any questions come in from the audience?
I'd like to open it to the audience right now. Be sure to send your questions in. We do have one question come in. I believe it was about the difference in features between Project Server and Project Online.
Okay, yeah, so Project Server on-premise and Project Online, Office 365 in the cloud. There are some differences. I mean, feature function-wise, very small in terms of, I guess if I would say it this way, out-of-the-box configurations are virtually identical. When you start getting into some things like, for example, custom reports, let's say a web part that does a SQL reporting service report to the back-end data in Microsoft Project Server, you might get some reports that you would use through a different technology. There is an environment in the cloud where you can bring in apps. Okay, so there are partners out there that provide add-ons that if you can't use SQL Service reporting services, there are some other dashboarding capabilities that might in fact be easier than using SQL reporting services because a lot of the dashboards that organizations want to see are fairly common across that organization.
All right. We have another question about other SaaS offerings. Why do you feel that Microsoft is best at solving resource management problems?
Oh, I don't remember saying that. Did I say that? I personally believe that the biggest challenge is not the technology. The biggest challenge is actually doing the other stuff we talked about. There's not, best comes with one of my favorite consulting questions is a follow-up is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by best? Let's define best. And so if you're looking for the cost-effective solution, certainly Microsoft is squarely in that part of the world. Certainly Gartner and their Magic Quadrant in terms of completeness of vision and ability to deliver. There are some other tools out there that score higher, but I can tell you that they're pretty expensive. So what I like to see is a set of requirements that says what meets the requirements, right? So there are a lot of tools out there that are very sophisticated, and some certainly are more sophisticated than Project Server, Project Online. My question is, do you have the horsepower from a process and a skill standpoint in the organization to take advantage of those? But one thing I will tell you, why is it best? It's certainly well known. The learning curve is lower, the price point entry is lower, and therefore, it's still the standard in many parts of the world. So good question. Hope you like the answer. Anything else, Dan?
That's the extent of the questions that we received. Again, we'll be sending out an email with lots of valuable information that we always have people following up asking about. So be looking for that. That'll answer your questions about how to get Category B PDUs. That'll be your answer to how to get a recording of the webinar, how to get slides, more information about our next webinar. It's all information that we always get asked about. So we decided instead of relying on you going to a web address that we would just send it to you directly. So we look forward to continuing to be in touch with you. Thank you so much, Gus, for leading us, and thank you so much, everyone, for attending.